Pyramids, temples, tombs. These ancient wonders promise even greater secrets still to be found beneath the sands of Egypt. Now, cutting-edge science decodes the mysterious land of the pharaohs.
With modern technology, we are gaining an insight into the way the ancient Egyptians lived and the manner in which they died.
This time, the mysteries behind Egyptian genius. Can scientists explain bizarre markings in the desert, first spotted from outer space?
The landscapes are like these post-apocalyptic wastelands, like an explosion went off.
Can a new lab experiment reveal Egyptians as the first surgeons?
Do they understand medicine hundreds of years before the Greeks?
And can modern technology shed light on how a pharaoh's capital city was discovered in two places?
Without the advent of a new scientific technique, we wouldn't be able to understand that story.
Ancient clues unearthed, long-lost evidence re-examined, precious artifacts brought into the light of the 21st. These are Egypt's unexplained files. Archaeologist Pierre Montet believed he'd found the remains of a great pharaoh's lost capital, Pi-Ramesses.
He was kind of dazzled by the statues and the obelisks and the inscriptions.
Then, in the year 2000, appeared to blow Montet's. It shows the location of the city nearly 20 miles away.
How can these two places, which are separated by miles, be connected?
Tanis, in the northeast, at his greatest pharaohs of all time.
All around him, he sees monuments of Ramesses II. His name and his image is everywhere.
Montet had found the lost capital of Pi-Ramesses until
He didn't really try to confirm it by looking for pottery, by looking for small finds, which really would.
In the late 60s, archaeologists began to examine the small artifacts from the site. Time of Ramesses II. Instead, they're from 1000 BCE. Archaeologists now ask,
Some people jump to the wrong conclusion that this had to be that city.
the search for Pi-Ramesses begins all. This lost city is irresistible.
It was a huge city. It's been suggested 30 square kilometers, the size of Manhattan, bigger even.
It's a huge, thriving metropolis. Temples, palaces, obelisks, colossal statues. It was a monument to Ramesses II's power and might.
Egyptologists one clue to the location of Pi-Ramesses, the great capital city.
It just tells us that Ramesses is on the easternmost branch of the Nile in the Nile Delta. It doesn't, though, give us its exact location.
The Nile flows into the Mediterranean in northern Egypt. Here, the river delta splits into many. Many of these have run dry and shifted location over millennia.
So when we're looking for the site of Pi-Ramesses, we have to look not only on branches of the river which exist now, branches in the past, but are now dried up.
Branch. The delta described in the ancient hymn. But they search among the ridges and valleys for evidence of ancient river runs. They're amazed to discover another dead branch of the Nile Delta even further east. the Pelusiac Branch, 20 miles from Tanis, near the modern city of Cantir. It's 1970, and archaeologists begin of tiny but crucial clues.
So it's really the sherds and the bit.
An intriguing question. Could these tiny finds, nearly 20 miles from where Then, they make another astonishing find.
Most intriguingly of all, we have evidence of a colossal statue of Ramesses II in a farmer's field. And this leads archaeologists to want to look more closely at this site.
It's another clue. This could be the keeper. They use handheld magnetometers to undertake the largest underground scan in the history of Egypt. The result:
an entire ancient capital city just revealed almost in an instant.
Networks of ancient streets and foundations of If the foundations of the capital city are here, in Cantir, then miles away, in Tanis. Once again, long-term changes in the Nile Delta
Branch that Pyramidsu was located on, the Pelusiac branch, silts up, makes the site useless. It's not a good port anymore. The harbor was no longer usable. There was no way for trade to get there. Carved for income.
Egyptologists believe 150 years after Ramesses, the Pelusiac branch of the Nile ran dry. "20 miles west to Tanis." It sounds an impossible undertaking, but experts know the Egyptians had done it before.
They were, of course, well used to this. The colossi of Memnon, of Amenhotep III, had been taken from the quarries 100 tons.
For Egyptologists, the earlier period in a more recent context.
The Egyptians were great recyclers.
Yet, on an unimaginable
It would have been involving a very significant, it would have been the big.
We don't know, probably taken it piecemeal as they were picking over the city.
It's a phenomenal undertaking, a massive undertaking to move all of that stone, that distance.
This is an almost superhuman effort on the part of the ancient Egyptians, but actually one that would
Build from scratch and bringing it from quarries which would have been a long way away, further away from Tanis than Pyramidsu is.
It was a lot cheaper.
In Pyramidsu, it's likely thousands of men were needed to move these great monuments to Tanis to rebuild once again.
It's a great revivification. Again, just
Astonishing achievement meant that 5,000 years later, it was not Ramesses that Montaigne carried across the desert from the great capital. Montaigne's discovery was in fact evidence of how the Egyptians pulled off one of the greatest engineering feats of the ancient world. sites.
And what's really scary is that number of these holes is increasing.
Scientists rush to investigate.
But what are they?
Satellite technology offers archaeologists the latest tool in the search for clues to the ancient past. But these 2012 have baffled the experts.
The landscapes near these archaeological sites are like these pockmarked, post-apocalyptic wastelands, like an explosion went off.
Many of the sites end up looking
As they seek an explanation for these deep craters near precious ancient sites, a new and unusual clue comes to light. Or 400 miles away, in Jerusalem, Israel.
Israeli authorities actually found 2 Egyptian sarcophagi in an antiquity shop in Jerusalem.
To experts, such as these for sale outside Egypt.
It's not unheard of that you would see Egyptian artifacts excavated from Israel. However, a large sarcophagus is typical in Israel.
The 2 were investigators believe these treasures have been looted to be sold.
You may say the item is authentic. That doesn't mean it's legal.
Could the holes in the desert be evidence of criminals digging for sarcophagi and other prizes of antiquity? Ancient Egypt's riches have certainly always been under threat from thieves.
The old practice, as far as crime is concerned, this profession
Was an Italian
Giovanni Belzoni, who was a master tomb robber.
Belzoni had an unusual set of skills that made
He was trained as a circus man, and he was actually a crack engineer, also self-trained. And he was hired by a number of wealthy men in Europe to get stuff for them.
some of Egypt's most impressive artifacts with stunning bravado.
Well, Belzoni makes his name initially by removing the bust of Ramesses II from outside the Ramesseum and hauling it down the Nile to Cairo for shipment to
Stealing priceless treasures and smashing. Belzoni also brazenly left his calling card at the scene of his crimes.
Belzoni wasn't shy about putting his name everywhere he could. And if you're a tourist in Egypt today and you climb into the burial chamber of King Khafre, one of the great pyramids on the Giza Plateau, you will see the name Belzoni as big as possible on the.
The story of Belzoni is evidence of the extreme lengths tomb raiders will go to steal Egyptian artifacts. The experts now examine the satellite images for the proof of 21st.
When archaeologists are using satellite images to today, they start to see more holes in the ground that weren't there.
These holes are revealed on closer inspection to be deep vertical shafts, tunnels dug by ancient.
Between archaeologists who are trying to properly record and excavate and to astronomical rates like we've never seen before in Egypt.
But why is there such an enormous spike in illegal digging? Many believe it's connected to the Egyptian Revolution, which civil unrest follows. Experts now believe
Sometimes that looting can be a couple of people In other cases, that looting is very systematic.
As they go in, irreparable damage to
with bulldozers away parts of a site, ancient materials that they can sell.
Average of 38,000 annual lootings of Egypt's precious archaeological sites. Artifacts are being stolen on an industrial scale to feed a global market.
The people buying these artifacts, that's countries in the West, like the United States, like the UK, France, Germany.
It's a trade that leaves archaeologists deeply troubled. But as long as there are people willing to pay for stolen artifacts, there will always be people willing to steal them.
The greatest tomb robbers of all are all of the people who are currently
Produced to create beautiful art 4,600 years ago. The world's first artificial pigment, Egyptian blue.
Egyptian blue was extraordinarily important throughout the ancient world.
They now believe this material forensic science.
Could Egyptian blue be used to solve 21st century crimes?
Color.
It has connotations as a color with fertility, with creation, with everything relating to the skies above.
Color into their art, but there was a problem.
Blue is not available. Yellows are common among different kinds of pigments, but blue is something difficult to create.
In 2600 BCE, to overcome this, the ancient Egyptians and made a breakthrough.
I think we can pretty safely say that the Egyptians were phenomenal chemists of the ancient world, and they clearly experimented.
The Egyptians calcium, so these are very common substances.
Balls of the mixture were placed into clay jars and put into ovens, heated at 1,000 degrees Celsius. The finished product was then first artificial pigment. Its chemical name? Calcium copper tetrasilicate. The color?
The ancient Egyptians were incredibly resourceful, and there essentially was not a problem that through tenacity and use of the resources at their disposal.
This Egyptian blues centuries ago, reliefs like these high-tech the remains of the Egyptian blue pigment reveals itself in a dazzling luminescent glow.
This paint, thousands of years technique.
Lighting conditions, this substance can still be found.
Blue color that was so desirous to obtain. They actually stumbled across something that was extraordinarily durable, even if not to the naked eye. Several millennia later, would still be detectable.
At Curtin University in Perth, Australia, see an opportunity. Could Egyptian blue's twin qualities of luminescence and durability be the key to solving a long-term problem of fingerprinting?
This could then potentially be a game changer for forensics.
When forensic teams arrive at a crime, contrasting color, which sticks to the figure.
Traditional fingerprinting powders, for instance, are made out of plant resins or a kind of soot.
But these crime scene teams are facing a challenge. On particular problem surfaces, the traditional powders are just not working.
With modern technology, polymer banknotes, highly patterned surfaces, it's incredible surfaces.
It might have. And even in a patterned surface, using Egyptian blue might enable the fingerprints to stand out more in scientific testing than traditional techniques.
The researchers at Curtin University believe an ability to science is looking for. Compound and then grind it down into microscopic particles onto fingerprints on a polymer banknote, a surface on which traditional dusting powders can falter. The surfaces are then illuminated in white light and photographed with a special camera which can detect infrared. The images are astonishing.
Even though it's a surface that would otherwise be a fingerprint, this particular substance, Egyptian blue, actually left some residue.
Soft drink powders, and then with Egyptian blue pigment. It reveals a vast improvement. Applying the blue pigment to other problematic surfaces, including patterned tiles and glass, the prints are incredibly clear.
It's amazing. Even though it's not visible to the naked eye, it glows under the near-infrared light.
The pigment's quality of exhibiting luminescence, coupled with its ability to impact in
What I find absolutely ancient, the synthetic pigment Egyptian blue is being used now in the 21st century.
It's kind of amazing to think that Egyptian blue could actually be used to catch criminals very soon.
In the archaeologists uncover the skeletal remains of an ancient female. Attached to the skull.
Look, they have hair extensions. The body is basically a skeleton, and yet the hair survived. And it's styled into these.
How has the hair survived when the bodies have rotted? And what is the significance of the
something unique? Was this something that had a special meaning? There are so many mysteries.
In 2014, and the team of researchers examine this strange skeleton in the grave. Our
becomes apparent that this woman isn't an isolated incident, that there are others, hundreds of other bodies.
In grave after grave, they find a similar outlandish hairpiece matted to the skulls of the dead.
Head of woman had hair extensions.
Bone experts are called in to examine the women. They search for clues that might help explain the presence of the hair. 1346 BCE, the city of Amarna is constructed as Pharaoh Akhenaten's eternal capital. Now, forensic archaeology, a lifetime of hard labor.
From very hard life, we can see that they had very strong arms, that they had very big muscles. We can see from their spines they are damaged. They were carrying a lot of heavy stuff. A lot of these people had serious health problems.
Workforce who kept Akhenaten death. The workers are found buried together in a mass cemetery. They're discovered wrapped in mats.
There are just slots excavated in where the ordinary people of Amarna were buried.
A practice restricted to the wealthy elite. Yet the hair is perfectly preserved. Examination to a special lab in Cairo. Researchers want to find out why it is frozen in time.
If you live in such a dry climate, then you want to put grease in your hair. And grease was also the way to perfume. So pressed flowers or resins.
Preserve the hair.
Analysis of the fats used in the hair reveal it comes from cows and goats. It appears to have been fashioned into a gel and worked into the hair.
And layer of protection to the hair itself, and so these things can survive thousands of years.
The lab technicians make another astonishing discovery. The hair used to make the braids appears to come from multiple sources.
The archaeologists are finding more people at Amarna with extensions of
So probably young girls could sell their hair maybe.
Examining the braids, the experts note how tightly and neatly they have been dressed. They conclude this work would have been too intricate to carry out in the final stages of a dying woman's life. Instead, they believe the process took place after death, in preparation for burial.
They couldn't afford life.
Preserved hairpieces for the impoverished women in their graves. They look for answers in the complex Egyptian burial rituals.
So we know that wealthy people,
they're hacked out in the rocks, they are beautifully decorated.
While the rest of the population, the working people, are just buried in a hole in the ground.
Pharaohs fill their tombs with gold thrones, jewelry, perfumes, and wines. They want to retain all their riches and bring them to the afterlife. The item these poor working women can afford to take are these elaborate hair extensions. Now, scholars have hit on explain why this artificial hairpiece was. It lies with the goddess Hathor, who personified beauty. It was believed she would
was the goddess of, but also had a role as a goddess of the dead.
In ancient Egyptian myth for her distinctive and beautiful hair.
Goddess Hathor, a mother goddess figure who was called She of the Beautiful Hair, the Lady of the Locks. And so if she for a glorious afterlife.
These Amarna women may have been using their only
Possible that these women were using hair extensions to allow them to be associated with her in their transformation into the next world.
Egyptologists now believe the women in Amarna were undergoing this simple post-mortem beauty ritual to be as beautiful as possible for their eternal afterlife.
Where to look your best meant everything.
They wanted to live in the afterlife. That's the way they were buried.
That filled the great pharaoh's tombs. What little money they had, they used to buy a precious wig. And 2017, a rock face. Archaeologists are amazed when they discover a collection of giant 2 feet high.
Why?
Ancient billboard.
These unique and mysterious signs are some of the earliest ever found. Over 5,000 years old. The Sphinx.
This was really about the last thing we expected we would find.
The expert's task is to decipher these ancient symbols and reveal this message from antiquity.
Trying to tell us.
Village of El Hawi. A team from Yale University, led by Professor John Darnell,
This is big, it's out in a public space, it's overlooking these roads, it's definitely.
These mysterious hieroglyphs date back to the birth of the entire language at around 3,200 BCE. 3 of them depict birds.
2 large stalks standing back to back. Between and slightly above them, we have an ibis.
Professor Darnell recognized
That arrangement evokes the horizon for the Egyptians, the sun rising in between. Pretty confident.
The solar cycle is the rising and falling of the sun each day. It affects this life, it affects the afterlife.
Ancient Egyptian religion, at its very core,
cosmic power and the solar cycle. The first clues to the meaning of the message on the rock face. But to the untrained eye, options. Professor Darnell. 4. Back in 1995, as they scrutinized scratchings in the rocks, also dating back over 5,000 years.
The scorpion tableau is a rock notations. It appears to date to the same time as the El Hawi inscription.
King Scorpion in battle.
The Scorpion King was the first king of the unified Upper Egypt. Beside this figure of the king, a familiar symbol can be identified.
Or very similar to the symbols that were found by the Yale team.
The exact same sign appears in that tableau as well.
Professor Darnell has a theory as to what this symbol carved into both walls in the same time period actually is.
The sign of a bull's head on a pole. It is identical.
Represents, comes in the form of one of ancient artifacts, also dating back just over 5,000 years.
so-called Nama palette, which is heavily adorned with images which seem to show the unification of Egypt by one king.
Narmer is depicted as a raging bull and knocking down the walls of an enemy fortress.
So it shows a kind of royal authority taking over the land.
Symbolize the royal leader.
The bull is a symbol of power.
We can say that it represents the ruler, the pharaoh of Egypt.
Now, the world's oldest hieroglyphs of this size on the cliff face at El Hawi can be pieced together. And Professor Darnell can reveal this message from antiquity.
This seems to be a statement that now there's a central authority. Now there's a focus for religious activity. Now there's a of these cosmic powers on Earth.
The king is showing his absolute authority to his subjects.
What this billboard is about, power and control.
The king is the one who's actually in charge of the solar cycle. That
DE. This message was carved in large hieroglyphs into the rock face, so that every traveler pausing at these crossroads could be left in no doubt of who was in total control of both the land and the sky that surrounded them: the Pharaoh. The discovery of a mummy bearing a wooden toe excites archaeologists. Is this an early form of prosthetic
Medicine and surgery, hundreds of years before the Greeks.
or is it part of a strange burial practice?
Is this something, or is it simply something to allow her mummy to be complete in the next world?
We need to sort the magic from the medicine.
Is uncovered in a tomb to the foot of a female mummy and is nearly 3,000 years old.
They found this female mummy with a toe that was made out of leather and wood.
Many archaeologists believe this relic is a symbolic token added during the mummification process to replace a missing toe.
We would assume in the afterlife.
Egyptology at Manchester University. Studying evidence of wear and tear on the toe, they theorized that this could actually be a fully functioning prosthetic, worn in life.
A group, they find 2 volunteers. Both of these volunteers have their big right toes missing.
Replica of the female mummy's wooden toe and attach it to the volunteer's feet. A series of tests to track their movements begins. If the toe is functional, this would be the earliest working prosthetic ever discovered. Will the results of the experiment finally show Egyptian medical of the ancient world?
Could the discovery of a toe on a mummy point us in the right direction?
Egyptologists also examine ancient medical papyri that surfaced in the mid-19th century, when a black market trade in these scrolls was booming.
A few of these documents point to Egyptian physicians as possessing far more advanced medical knowledge.
Show that the ancient Egyptians had a deep understanding of the human body.
They show that the Egyptians understood things like the heart pumping fluids around the body. They understood anatomy. They understood certain organs. They understood the human body probably better than any other ancient civilization.
A document known as the Edwin Smith
Manual basically for trauma victims.
those modern doctors treating body trauma employ today.
Practical medicine, surgery, particularly to do with orthopedics, bone damage.
If the wound was quite deep, then they would stitch it up. I mean, they were remarkable at stitching.
You see some of these medical equipment, it's the same that we use today in a lot of cases. The Egyptians were at the body works.
Through university, the Egyptologists want to put this documented medical prowess to the volunteers are asked to walk on a 10-meter walkway wearing ancient Egyptian replica toe attached, and then without.
They helped both volunteers balance, so it definitely could have been used.
The replica wooden artificial toe makes it much easier for the volunteers to walk in the Egyptian-style sandals.
This toe was actually
would indeed have functioned as a lifetime prosthesis.
Experts believe that the artificial toe found on the mummy was used in her daily life to aid her walking. Also, that it was readjusted for size as she got older.
It was there to help her balance and to give her function back. So what this tells us is that ancient Egyptian medicine was far more advanced than we ever gave them credit for.
Technologically, scientifically, and medically, the ancient Egyptians were really advanced, and this was ever found in history.
This is from the ancient papyrus.
About these ancient civilizations, and we tend to think that they're all backward. No, Egyptians are one of the most advanced civilizations when
their contemporaries. The Egyptians were laying down the blueprint for what would become the field of modern medicine.